should say I haven't done physics for a very long time, so calling me a physicist is a little bit deceptive, although I do have a degree in it. Let me start with a very brief sketch of the history. Iceland was settled by the Norse starting in 870. There is some evidence that there were Irish monks there before that, but if so, they prudently left. The legal system I'll be discussing got set up in 930. There were some changes in it over the rest of the century. In 1000, Iceland converted to Christianity with toleration for private but not public pagan worship. That conversion was by an arbitrated settlement. The arbitrator was in fact pagan, and the conflicts before it killed a handful of people. But by the standards of most places that went from paganism to Christian, it was a pretty peaceful event. Starting around 1200, the system started breaking down with increased levels of violence, though probably not very high by our standards. And in 1263, well, in 1262, 3/4 of Iceland, 3 of the 4 quarters, voted to turn the country over to the King of Norway, and in 1263, the third, the North Quarter, I think, agreed, and that's really the end of the story that I'm telling. Our sources for it, the most interesting sources are the sagas. The Icelandic saga. Iceland, I think, is arguably one of the most productive societies in history on a per capita basis of literature. That is to say, you're talking about a population of maybe 70,000 people in a far corner of the world who produced, I would guess, easily a dozen books that are currently in print in English translations. Say a small to medium-sized suburb a very long time ago. The sagas are readable stories. There are really 2 groups of them: the family sagas, which are set in the 1st century or so, a little longer than that, but were not written down until about the 13th century, and the Sturlung sagas, which are set in the period when they were written down. They describe the period of breakdown in the 13th century, and they were written by people who were participants. And that matters because one of the problems is, to what extent can you trust the sagas for a description of things? And you aren't sure for the ones that were written several hundred years later, but you're pretty sure for the ones that were contemporary. We also have 2 surviving legal texts from the very end, one of them from just before the end of the period, and one of them from just after. They don't always agree with the sagas. I have a chapter in my book, Legal Systems Very Different from Ours, which I believe is I think I have a link to it webbed on my webpage, which I've got over there, discussing the various apparently inconsistencies between them and how I resolve them. And also we have archaeological evidence, but that's what I'm working on. The legal system of Iceland had laws. It had a legislature that made laws. It had a court system for settling disputes, but there was no executive arm of government. That is to say, there was no government official in charge of either prosecuting people or enforcing verdicts. Once you got your verdict, it was up to you and your friends to enforce it. And that, in a sense, I sometimes refer to it as a semi-stateless society, in that you had some of the institutions we associate with government, but nothing like all of them. How does it work? The structure of the system depended on a set of people called 𝗃𝗲 is singular, 𝗃𝗲 is plural, who seem to have originally been pagan priests, but ended up with what's essentially a legal role. There were initially 36, and I think eventually 42 after some changes in the 1st century or so. And being a 𝗃𝗲 was property right. You could sell your 𝗃𝗲𝗀, which was the right to be a 𝗃𝗲, to somebody else. You could leave it to your son. You could even subdivide it, have 2 people agree to take turns in who exercised the rights. What was it? One of the things it was 1 seat in the Logreta, in the legislature. The other and more important thing was that it was the way in which ordinary Icelanders plugged into the legal system. So that being the thingman of a particular 𝗃𝗲 was like being the citizen of a US state, say. Which meant that if somebody wanted to sue you, the first thing he had to do was to ask you whose 𝗃𝗲 you were in, because that would determine what court he could sue you in. There was a series of courts, starting with the courts for clusters of 3 𝗃𝗲 all the way up to the 5th court, which was for disputes between people from different quarters of Iceland. There were the quarter courts were the main ones where things got settled. At a court had 36 judges. They use the term judges, but it's really closer to jurymen. In everything except the 5th court, the rule was that you could have no more than 6 dissents in order to get a verdict. At the 5th court, it was by majority rule. So most cases are settled out of court. People have done calculations going through the sagas and such, and it looks like about 90% of cases were settled out of court. The basic logic of the system is that if somebody wrongs you, you find out what 𝗃𝗲 he is in, you summon him to a case, which is either, well, typically in one of the quarter courts at the 𝗃𝗏thing. The 𝗃𝗏thing is the annual assembly at which each 𝗃𝗲 is supposed to come with, I forget what fraction of his thingmen. The only tax in the system is that the members, the term 𝗃𝗲 is also used for the set of thingmen of a single 𝗃𝗲, and those who don't go to the 𝗃𝗏thing are supposed to contribute to the expenses of those who do. All of this is bargained. That is, you can freely choose at least any 𝗃𝗲 in your quarter of Iceland, and maybe, under some circumstances, 𝗃𝗲 elsewhere in Iceland. And any terms between the 𝗃𝗲 and his thingmen are basically bargain terms. You can change from one to another, but I think there's one day, or at least one period each year, when you can officially make that change. One of the interesting questions for any such system is what keeps it stable. And obviously you have to worry about the possibility that a feud will develop in which each side thinks he's on the right, and therefore each side tries to kill people on the other side or sue people on the other side. There's, I think, a 19th century author who comments that it's amazing they had such an elaborate legal system for people whose chief hobby was killing each other. But he was wrong. Their chief hobby was suing each other, and they only needed an occasional killing to keep the lawsuits going. I exaggerate a little bit. But there's at least some truth to that. One of the interesting things about the system is the distinction between killing and murder. If you are a good law-abiding Icelander and you just happen to kill somebody, you are obliged to go to the nearest house which does not contain people who are relatives of the guy you killed and therefore will kill you if you tell them. Announce the fact. I am so-and-so, I just killed so-and-so, I name the following wounds which I'm responsible for, he's lying over there, goodbye. At which point, of course, then his kin can start taking legal action to ask for damages or to try to get you outlawed. The normal payment for a killing is called 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗲, that's man gold, and it was a sizable amount of money. Why does it matter? If you are a murderer, aside from the fact that that's a shameful thing to be, but if you're a murderer, then all claims of forfeit immunity, all claims that your killing him was legitimate, for example, self-defense, or even that he was an outlaw who was legal to kill, those vanish if you did not announce that you did it. So similarly, there is a large difference between, I'm not sure what the terms are, but basically in a sense, robbing somebody and stealing from someone. That, you know, Vikings engaged in a certain amount of enterprise, but if you're a respectable Icelander and you happen to have grabbed something from somebody, you announce the fact, so he can then sue you and try to get back at you. So one effect of all of this was that you don't really see in the sagas much, if any, disagreement about the facts of a case. That the disagreement is always about the legal status, that a good lawyer will try to argue that for one reason or another some part of the procedure is illegitimate. There's a famous case in Njál saga where somebody who doesn't have a good defense, who is himself a 𝗃𝗲, quietly transfers his 𝗃𝗲 to, I think, his brother. becomes the thingman of another 𝗃𝗀𝗲 in a different quarter of Iceland. And then when they sue him, countersues for the fact they have illegally sued him in the wrong court. So that's sort of an example of the kind of thing that you get in the sagas, where people are trying to use legal trickery, but they aren't. I can't remember any case in the saga where somebody said, no, I didn't kill him. That's always settled, and that makes it a good deal easier to do the system. It also means that you don't require quite as high a punishment, because if you have a system where you only catch one guy out of 5, then you've got to have, as it were, a 5-fold punishment so that it won't be worth his while stealing, killing, or whatever. Whereas if you have a system where you know that you're going to get caught, so to speak, because you're announcing the fact, that makes it easier to make that work. What happens if I get out, if I get a verdict against me, I'm supposed to pay some money to somebody and I don't? I get outlawed. Once I am outlawed, it is legal to kill me and illegal to defend me or even to feed me or provide me housing. Typically, if I have any sense, I get out of Iceland at that point. The lesser outlawry, the outlawry goes away in 3 years. The greater outlawry, it doesn't. At least we don't know of any. I don't think there are any cases. I think I've seen one thing suggesting that 20 years would do it, but if so, nobody made it, at least that we know of. The part of what's impressive in the sagas is the fact that people always assume that ultimately they're going to be bound by the law. So there's a case in one of the 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀 sagas, which are the point when things are breaking down, you're having substantial sized battles with maybe 50 people on a side instead of the 4 people on a side that you get in ordinary saga things. And it is still assumed that you're going to have to pay for people you killed. There's one quite neat scene where, if I remember correctly, one side has attacked the house and ending up burning the house and killing some people inside it. And they agree to pay 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, but they say, we won't pay 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃 for so-and-so because we offered to let him out. We offered to pay him to come out, and he didn't. So we're not responsible. And in the family sagas, it's very clear. There's a line by Gunnar in Njál's saga where he says, where they've been attacked, they've killed a bunch of attackers. The question is, do they pursue the rest of the attackers? They run away. As Gunnar and his brother, who are both very able, and Gunnar says, no, we'll be out of, our purses will be empty when we've paid for all the people we've killed. And I should say that's a disagreement between the Gragas and the sagas, because by Gragas, those people should have fallen with forfeit immunity because they attacked Gunnar. He didn't attack them. But at least in the sagas, that doesn't usually seem to happen. What if I and my friends insist on fighting back and defending the outlaw? The problem with doing that is that a group of people who are being lawful are fighting a group of people who are unlawful. If anybody gets hurt on this side, he now has a legal claim against somebody on that side, and his relatives are going to join in that claim. So if you try to break the law, the coalition against you expands, and therefore it in fact doesn't pay until, I would say, by 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃 period that's probably not true, but at least before 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃 period it's pretty clear. There's another neat scene in Njál's saga where you've got a court case which it looks as though it's going to break down into violence in the open air courtroom, which is where the whole thing is held. And, well, it's not a courtroom, it's a piece of land. Somebody on one side asks somebody who is friendly but not part of their coalition, what will you do to help us? And he says, here's what I'll do. I'll drop my men over there, which blocks the best place for them retreating to. And if you're winning, I'll break up the fight before you kill more men than you can afford. So it's really quite a neat system. One of the problems with the feud system, I should say I have a chapter in the legal systems book on feud systems in general and sort of the logic of them, is how do you protect the weak people? What if I'm somebody who doesn't have strong sons who went a Viking, and I don't have friends and relatives who will fight for me, and I know that if I try to sue you who just killed my son, I'll get beaten up on the way to the courthouse. And the Icelandic solution to that is that claims are marketable. So I go to my other neighbor, who has 4 strong sons who went a Viking in their youth and lots of friends and allies. And I say, how do you like to prosecute this case for me? There's 200 ounces of silver for it when you win the case. And if he's generous, he may agree to do it and to give me the 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. If he's not generous, he may keep the 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. But either way, the guy who committed a crime against me has gotten prosecuted, and that's a reason not to commit crimes even against weak people. That's sort of one of the standard problems that you have to solve in a feud system, is having some way. And I've argued that making tort claims marketable is a great idea. We ought to do it too. You can think of contexts where somebody damages your car and you don't know how to find a good lawyer and you're not a lawyer yourself. Well, all you do is you just auction off the claim, and whoever pays you the highest will do the best job of enforcing it. So I like to say this is a respect in which the American legal system is a mere 1,000 years behind the cutting edge of legal technology. And I assume the Irish legal system too, though at present, but I don't know now. How do you terminate feuds? Well, first, the fact that there's a court makes it less likely that you'll have a feud in the first place, because it means that everybody knows who has what legal obligations. Now, you can still have one in the sense that I can pay my damages, as it were, and then I'm mad at you, and so somebody else gets killed, and it goes back and forth. There's again, in 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, which is one of the better known sagas, there's a famous series of killings in which what's going on is that you have 2 women who hate each other and their husbands are very good friends. And so somebody is killed, the relevant husband pays the 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, his wife gets somebody to kill the person who killed her person, that husband pays the 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃, and you've got one bag of silver going back and forth for, I don't know, maybe 4 killings or 5 killings or so. That's fairly unusual, but it's not impossible. One way of terminating is by accepting the legal judgment. One way is an out-of-court settlement, because people don't like to be in a situation where they and their relatives are getting killed. And one fairly common way is arbitration. So you find somebody who is regarded as a trustworthy person, who is himself powerful. You get him to agree to arbitrate your dispute, and you both agree to accept his arbitration. If he arbitrates against you, you can go along without looking like a wimp, because you've got the arbitrator's verdict. And if he arbitrates against you and you don't go along, you've just acquired a new enemy on the other side. So that worked pretty well. Why did it break down? It isn't clear, but what seems to be happening is that in the late period, the power is becoming more concentrated, so that you will have a single family which owns a bunch of 𝗃𝗃𝗃 rather than 42 𝗃𝗃𝗃 owned by 42 different people. And that means there's less competition, more a position where you can say, well, if you live in this area, you'd better be one of our thingmen, and if we do something you don't like, tough luck. So it did eventually break down. Why power becomes more concentrated isn't entirely clear. It might be related to the conversion to Christianity, because you got a system where tithes were a sort of equivalent to a tax. The part of the tithes went to the landowner who had donated the land and built the church for a particular church. That gave you revenue sources which people could fight over, so that may be part of it. But the truth is, I don't think we really know. We only know that. On the other hand, it lasted for about a third of a millennium, which is certainly better than the US has managed so far. We had a civil war a good deal bloodier than the 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 period in the first century of US history. I think I'm about out of time. I want to listen to this next one because I've got a bunch of questions about Irish law. I have a chapter in the legal systems book on Irish law, but it's a somewhat puzzled chapter because I don't think I understand it well enough for my purposes. Thank you.